Hello, this is going to be a different kind of video today. As you can see by the picture that's in front of you, I got some artwork done. Thank you to Wiktoria Orlicka for doing that for me. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, didn't mean to. But anyway, this video is going to be the first of a series about the Crusades that I'm doing. And this one is going to be the context for the first Crusade, and basically the context for the beginning of the Crusades. I'm going to stop just before Pope Urban II makes his speech. So I'm going to give a quick overview of both ends of Europe, or Eurasia. I will talk about the lead up to the 11th century, because the first Crusade was 1095 AD, that's when it started. Beginning from the end of the Roman Empire to the 11th century. So, starting in the 4th century AD, Christianity was officially made the state religion of the Roman Empire. Now, this vastly increased the wealth, reach, and power of the church. And you can see from these two maps how the Christian population and reach changed between the 3rd century AD and the 11th. By the 7th century, Christianity was widespread from Britain to Egypt, Arabia to Spain, and up into Armenia. This dominance over the known world could not last forever though, and from Arabia, rumblings of future greatness would begin. The Prophet Muhammad was supposedly born in 570 AD in Mecca on the western coast of the Arabian Peninsula in what is now Saudi Arabia. Not much is known about the Prophet's early life, although we do know that by age 6 he was an orphan and he was born in Mecca. But by age 40 he began telling stories of being visited by the angel Gabriel in a cave. And he initially, in fact, thought he was going mental, he thought he was going spare, but he came to the conclusion that these things that the angel Gabriel was saying were the works of God, after initially thinking it was because of being possessed by a demon. And these teachings would eventually, over the years, evolve into Islam. So there you have the third major Abrahamic religion being born, but the second, which is relevant to our story of the Crusades. I won't go into the theological teachings of Islam here. I mean, perhaps for a later video when I'm very well read on it. But for the purposes of this video, I will say that at the end of his life in 632, he had unified the Arabian Peninsula under one banner. And to give context for what kind of achievement that is, before that it had been in the Arabian Peninsula just tribal raiders, basically, like Bedouin raiders that would just sack cities, and basically nomadic tribes. In the preceding centuries, the Islamic army would conquer an empire which dwarfed even that of the Romans. It stretched from Al-Andalus, which is modern day Spain, all the way to India and down into Africa as well, down into the area which is now Sudan, and obviously all of Arabia, and up to just about Constantinople, but they didn't quite get Constantinople. They had neutered the Persians and temporarily done so to the Romans too. They had conquered almost all of the Visigothic kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula, that which is now Portugal and Spain. They had sacked Rome in 846 and conducted periodic raids upon the Byzantines. They had even sieged Constantinople twice, the most famous of which being in 717 under Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, albeit unsuccessfully. The Byzantines were aided by a particularly harsh winter in Constantinople. And this last battle, this last kind of attempt at conquest that I've listed here, halted Muslim expansion into Eastern Europe for the moment. This also dovetailed nicely with the defeat of the Muslim army in the west by Charles Martel at Tours in 732, so just 15 years later. Although I will say that 15 years back then was as long as 15 years now. It was also as short as 15 years as now, so don't get it into your head that that's like right next to each other, because it is 15 years of difference. 6-year-olds would be 21 by then. 15 years from now I'll be 34, so that is quite a difference. The part of Muslim expansion, however, which really kicked the Christians in the teeth, be they Orthodox or Catholic, or some weirdo backwards tribal sect, but the part that really kicked them in the teeth was the conquest of the Holy Land, the place where Judaism had been born, the place where Christianity had been born, the place where Jesus had been crucified, and the early expansion and all that stuff. So the area of like Canaan and like Jerusalem and Judea, all that. I mean, I know Jerusalem's a city, but you know what I mean. That area, the far eastern coast of the Mediterranean, like eastern Syria, Israel, Palestine, Sinai. They had conquered all that area, and this was obviously upsetting to the Christians. So, one good point, I mean, under Muslim rule, as far as I can divine from the information I've read and heard in podcasts, life wasn't terrible. Although, I mean, this is not to say that it was excellent. That is for non-Muslims, I mean. There were definite incentives to convert to Islam, so I'm not about to tell you that everywhere you went, people of different religions were arm in arm, but it was also not wall-to-wall persecution of Christians and Jews everywhere you went, like terrible life for everybody. One example of one of these incentives, there was a religious tax. It was called the jizya. Tell me how I'm doing on this Arabic pronunciation. I've only seen these words written and heard and spoken by people who are English speakers. So, this tax was levied against the permanent non-Muslim subjects, so people who didn't just convert. The option was basically, you can either keep your religion and pay the tax, or convert and you would get the perks of being a Muslim under a caliphate. This tax definitely cemented the hegemony of Islam in the minds of the subjects. It was very much, you can keep your religion if you say we're better. Smiley face. If you would like a much more in-depth look at the Arab/Muslim conquests, check out Flashpoint History's series on it, the link to which will be in the description. He does a very good job of explaining the reason that so many places are Islamic today, and in fact the reason that Spain isn't, despite the fact that they were very much conquered for quite a lot of their history. By the late 10th century, the Byzantines were on the rebound. They had initially gone on the reconquest of the western provinces, like I've done my video on. I'll link that in the description below if you want a look at that side of things. But from about Heraclius onwards, from the Heraclian dynasty up until about Nicephorus Phocas in the late 960s, or in the late 950s rather, it was very much kind of an empire in decline, or just at rock bottom really, for the Romans anyway. But by the late 10th century they were definitely in the rebound. Alexius Komnenos was in charge. He had been a general who had been raised to power by the army once again, and he turned out to be one of the best emperors that they had seen in all of their history. He managed to reconquer a lot of Anatolia from the Turks after the Crusades. We'll get to that very soon. We'll get to that after the videos that I'm going to do about the First Crusade in its entirety. But before that, the emperors Nicephorus Phocas and Basil II had very much cemented the idea of a Byzantine resurgence, which was definitely going on at that time after the plague of Justinian. Eventually the aftershocks of that died down. However, you can see from this map the sheer scale of the reconquest that happened under these two emperors, Nicephorus Phocas and Basil II. When I show this, the video that's playing just now is a map of the Byzantine Empire between 950 and 1025. I've linked to the channel which created this map timeline too below. It's called Emperor Turgaster or Trigaster. So the guy's great, he does loads of maps like this, so I would definitely recommend that you go and check him out. This success in reconquest was not to continue. If you know anything about Byzantine history, this must not surprise you. Partly due to the now differing cultures between Byzantium and the Balkans, as well as a new threat on the eastern horizon of Anatolia. These were the two areas that those two emperors had reconquered, Anatolia and the Balkans. The Turks were a brand new threat, and I put that in the most capital of capital letters. The Turks were a huge change in history, really. They had come down from the steppes of Central Asia and actually North Russia as well. They've come down that far and entered Anatolia. Some of the reasons I've seen for this is because of climate change. They could no longer kind of eke out an existence being nomadic, so they had to head for the more mild ground and better farming country of Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. Here's a map of the Turkish migration from the steppes of Central Asia into Anatolia, with the time scale on the left hand side. And the Turks, Turk is an umbrella term for a series of tribes who all came from the same place. In the case of the Byzantines, their problem about this time were the Seljuk Turks. Later on they would have problems with the Timurids, but just now it was the Seljuks, who eventually established an empire after wars with the Byzantines in Anatolia. These two groups fought numerous wars from over the mid to late 11th century, but over time the Turks began to get the upper hand. The empire ended up losing almost all of Anatolia, being reduced to just Greece and a small kind of slither of the southern Balkans, as well as a few cities in Italy and a few like tiny outposts in Illyria, which is like the northern Balkans. All of this led to Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Komnenos. He turned to the help of the West. He sent envoys to the Pope to help him deal with the Turks. Now let's look at the situation in the West. The situation in Western Europe was a mostly Christian one, and when I say Christian I mean Catholic. So you can really see where the name Christendom came from. It's the domain of Christ. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, chaos ensued. Britain separated into numerous different kingdoms. The Scots came up from Ireland into the north, displacing the Picts. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpin established the Kingdom of Scotland. The Angles, Jutes and Saxons came from the European continent, from an area which is now Denmark and Germany, to the land that is now England, and established the Heptarchy, which were 7 different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that basically fought for dominance for a 500-year period until Alfred the Great started coming up with the idea of a unified English identity. And in 927, his idea was realised into the Kingdom of England by King Athelstan of Wessex. England, over the next few centuries, annexed all of Wales and almost all of Ireland, until eventually becoming the United Kingdom with Scotland, obviously, but like that's way past the Crusades. Of course, the Normans had a hand in this too, as I'm sure you all know. William the Conqueror ended Anglo-Saxon England in 1066 by conquering it. I would go into the reasons for that, for why he came over to conquer, but it's kind of complex to go into here. On the European continent, the Goths had established kingdoms in Iberia and the Iberian Peninsula and in Italy, with the Ostrogoths in Italy and the Visigoths in Spain. The Byzantines had conquered all of Italy under Justinian the Great, but as soon as he died in 568, they started losing land to the Lombards, they started losing land to the Muslims in the south, eventually they lost land to the Normans as well. The Normans fought wars with the Byzantines and with the Emirate of Sicily in order to win back some of those lands, and they eventually did so, establishing the Kingdom of Sicily, and which would later encompass the Kingdom of Naples. The Franks, who were a Germanic tribe, under Charlemagne, had expanded from their humble beginnings in northeast France, or what is today northeast France, to encompass almost all of Europe, to the point where he was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope. In my opinion, this is unbelievably embarrassing fanboyishness, to be honest. Charlemagne was not the Roman Emperor, but there he was, getting crowned as the Roman Emperor. But this was the first real stability, or the first real unification that Europe had seen since the fall of the West. His empire, Charlemagne's empire, encompassed about half of Italy down to Rome, all of France, all of Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, all of these places, some of Spain as well. And it was kind of amazing to see. It was like 400 years after there was a Carolingian Renaissance, which was kind of the first good thing that had happened to Europe since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Because even after that, it did definitely fall into chaos, especially on the continent. Like, all these places just fell into like marauding bands of thugs, basically, just going about destroying stuff and fighting amongst themselves. The Muslims, as previously mentioned, had conquered most of Iberia, a sliver of France, the islands of the Mediterranean like the Balearics, and Sardinia and Corsica and Sicily, as well as a portion of southern Italy in the area which is now Tuscany. The portions of Italy in Muslim hands would be conquered by the Normans, as I said, in the mid-11th century, in the 1050s, fought wars with the Muslims. The Normans under Robert Guiscard captured Bari, a city in Apulia in the heel of Italy in 1071 from the Byzantines, and fought again against them in Illyria in 1081 and 1085 in Dyrrhachium, an area which Julius Caesar and Pompey's forces had famously fought against in the First Roman Civil War. By the year 1000, the Christians of northern Iberia would begin to make some moves against the Caliphate. The Reconquista had begun. Also, by the time of the Crusades, the Frankish Empire had fractured, originally into West Francia, which is now France, Middle Francia, which is now parts of France, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and far west Germany, and into East Francia, which is now basically Germany. But even later on than that, closer to our narrative, it had fractured completely. It wasn't just kind of decentralised central administration, but there were totally different realms. It had fractured into the Holy Roman Empire, the Kingdom of France, and the Kingdom of Italy in the north of what is now Italy. This particular schism became an age-old rivalry, in my opinion, between France and Germany. You can see the roots of that here. This about rounds up our preemptive tour of the known world just before the Crusades. Join me next time for the events directly preceding the First Crusade. We'll be talking about Peter the Hermit, Pope Urban II, the People's Crusade, that weird rebellion in Germany that caused the death of loads of Jews. It'll be a fun time. Thanks very much for joining me. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, share the video. I'll see you in the next one.